Welcome to the Roar Mindset, Leading Through Chaos. I'm Peter Brandberger. For nearly 3 decades, I've led teams and programs through the messy middle, where disruption is constant and control is an illusion. Today, I help leaders embrace chaos to turn disruption into an advantage. On this podcast, you'll hear stories, insights, and strategies to help you stop fighting disruption, lead with clarity, and thrive in uncertain times. Today's guest is Dani Cirignano, who is a writer, certified integral coach, and holistic recovery guide based in San Francisco. Her work and writing weave together themes of curiosity, creativity, and consciousness, and she believes that an expanded sense of joy, pleasure, and play is the ultimate aim of personal growth and self-development. And I can attest that she prefers the margins over the middle every damn time. I met Dani during our New Ventures West professional coaching certification program, and we've had a few rich conversations about chaos. After recently attending her Chaos is a Friend of Mine webinar, I wanted to explore how leaders can embrace chaos rather than resist it. In this episode, Dani shares her guiding principles of centering peace in her life and work, along with her exploration of chaos theory as a framework for growth, recovery, and leadership. We explore her 3 key principles: trust, flexibility, and support, as anchors for navigating uncertainty. This conversation challenged how I think about chaos, and I believe it will for you too. Enjoy. Welcome, Dani. How are you doing today?
Hi, Peter. Good. Nice to see you.
Yeah. Let's begin with what matters most to you these days.
The first thing that comes to mind is the question I've been holding recently is, what would it be like for peace to be my kind of number one goal in life, pursuing peace for myself, and thinking about person rather than thinking about output or what I'm doing or producing. Like, how can I center peace as the number one priority? I'm very far away from experiencing that, but it's feeling increasingly important as I age and as the world is feeling the way that it feels right now.
That's great. We're starting this peace journey.
And you'll understand this as a coach. I would say that the first thing I'm starting with is actually giving myself permission to do a little bit less. And sometimes I talk about this internal instant pot, just like releasing some of the pressure. I was noticing in the early part of the summer that I was putting a lot of pressure on myself and to do certain things in my business, and it was causing a lot of stress. And I've noticed a lot of an increase in mental spaciousness. Such a blessing.
Yeah. A little bit of grace and a little bit of space.
I feel like it's an appropriate vibe for summer anyway.
It is. Yes. Even in chilly San Francisco.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe let's start with the phrase that sparked this episode, which is chaos is a friend of mine. As in for the others, I joined your workshop with that title, Chaos is a Friend of Mine. So what does that mean to you?
Yeah, this question opens up perhaps a little bit of backstory of how I arrived at the phrase, which is my background in coaching and in my own lived experience is in addiction recovery, specifically alcohol addiction. And I was noticing this phenomenon where my clients, when they were just about at a point where they were going to make developmental breakthrough, that often there was this strange period where their behavior would get, the word that I would use is chaotic. They would maybe have days or weeks or months of abstinence, real meaningful progress, and something would happen and they would revert back to past behaviors or have, let's say, a bigger binge episode, something like this. And then they would leap ahead, and it was like the dots would connect in this new way. And it almost was like the final burst of something. And so I saw hundreds of clients at that time, and I really started to wonder, okay, if this is such a pattern, could it be a feature or function instead of a bug? Is this something that's inherent to this process versus something that we have to view as wrong?
Mm.
And so that took me down a Google rabbit hole initially, and I just started to get curious about chaos theory. And then what I discovered is that there's specific principles to chaos theory that, when extrapolated or translated to in a more therapeutic or even philosophical or creative standpoint or framework, translate to a human life, right? So I think if we think about chaos theory, most people maybe know a little bit about the butterfly effect or weather patterns, things like this, but there are these like specific principles that we can translate. And since then, I've developed this workshop, and I've really started to see this as a framework for life. And it actually gives me a big sense of grounding in the current time that we're living in, where it feels very unstable and uncertain, perhaps more than any of us who are currently alive have experienced before. And so, yes, it's like befriending chaos, cozying up to chaos, looking at chaos as something that is actually necessary for growth and development and creativity and expansion, versus something that we need to control or avoid or tamp down or be afraid of.
Yeah, I love it. I love turning towards chaos as a tool. I mean, as a positive. Chaos, I think, gets a bad rap, so to speak, that it's something to be avoided at all costs. And you're saying the opposite. Let's embrace chaos and see what emerges.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a tendency, a very human tendency. We are literally biologically wired to seek security and stability. But if we're talking in terms of expanding and developing human consciousness, I think it's a really worthwhile skill to learn how to operate inside of uncertainty and to not get knocked down by it. So turning and facing chaos, learning to be with chaos, seeing it not as something that's going to destroy us, but that it can actually lead to.
Hmm. Yeah, and to me, leadership is a mindset. So it's really the mindset that you can't control, but be ready for it and maybe even embrace it or seek it when chaos happens, so that you can see what new emerges, like what creative can emerge.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What's your take on how a leader would see chaos?
I think a principle is an interpretation of it is a framework of chaos theory teaches us how to with life and its dynamism and unpredictability, versus the way that we societally in the West, most of us have been conditioned to operate, which is we want to sort of plan ahead, prepare, see around corners, try to control or predict, all these kind of more mechanistic views of the world and how to operate. And what chaos theory invites us into is, rather than controlling or manipulating life, seeing it as like this perfectly upward trajectory that we're moving on, it invites us into an orientation that is flexible and adaptive and geared toward innovation. And I think about, instead of resisting reality, which when we resist chaos, that's resisting reality.
Mhm.
Chaos theory invites us into an orientation where we're partnering with life. Instead of seeing life as something that we have to control or even that is an antagonist, it's the way that we're seeing life as a partner. And I think it's a resilient model. One of the three components of it is trust, trusting the unfolding of things, flexibility, right? Flexible to what's happening instead of rigid and trying to hold things the way that they were. And then support with these practical applications that I've researched and put together. Part of what this invites us into is relationships. So we're not just on our own in this individualistic way. We are embedding ourselves into a web of connection, a web of relationships. So in these, if I were to narrow it down, trust, flexibility, and support, I think that these are three really important qualities for leaders today.
Yeah, I love those.
Leaders
Yeah,
of the nation or in your own life.
let's dive into trust. How do you see trust as an important part? How do you work with people who don't see how to trust that, or how would they build that trust level and to be able to engage with chaos?
Yeah. Okay. We probably need 3 episodes to talk about this, but the way that I see things currently, like perhaps more in the collective, is that a lot of the structures and organization that historically culture or society has turned to or leaned on as places of stability and structure and meaning are shifting very quickly. We might even say some of them are in collapse. So if we look at the current state of academia, of healthcare, of the government, even things like the nuclear family is shifting. Pretty much gone are the days where someone works for a company and stays there for 40 years and then collects a pension. All of these things that historically we've outsourced, stability, security, are falling away. And this is causing this swirl of fear because the truth that this is an uncertain, unstable world, we can't ignore it anymore. Where trust comes in, I believe one of the most important things that we can do is to begin to reclaim our own ability to be okay no matter what is happening externally. And so developing trust, I'm looking at it through the lens of these practical things that I've put together as part of this framework on chaos theory as a model for living. It's things like really knowing your core values, connecting to them, living in increased alignment with them, clearing up areas of your life where you maybe have stood away, strengthening your own sense of self, reevaluating the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what's possible, really catching ourselves when we're seeking validation or the sense of being okay from outside of ourselves, and that we begin to create meaning for ourselves. Sometimes when we're making a decision, of course, we might weigh the pros and cons or crowdsource from trusted people. But I think there's really something important here about developing a sense of inner authority, that you are the authority of your life, that you have a say over the story and the meaning that you derive from it. When I think about developing trust, it's developing a sense of interconnectedness with the world, spending time in nature.
It's like the butterfly effect, huh?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe describe the butterfly effect for people who maybe are not familiar with it.
Yes, so the sort of most widely referred to example is that the beating of a butterfly's wings in the Amazon rainforest can cause that tiny little ripple that it causes can lead to a typhoon in Taiwan. So the beautiful thing about this principle is that small is all. I actually got from Adrienne Maree Brown. I highly recommend her work. We can start with these very small things and then they build as a show. Think about that in terms of habit change, right? We start with this small action, this different action. If you were to just drop in on someone's life and see that, it would be the smallest blip, but extrapolated over time, right? This small action that you take on May 1st, right? You look back on December 1st and something has happened. There's been some sort of adaptation or evolution. So that's one of the beautiful parts of the butterfly effect.
Yeah, it's also the maybe a corollary of that is when somebody just looks at the end and sees, oh my gosh, this is like a wonderful, huge thing that just happened, when it really was an accumulation of all this work and effort that people.
Yeah, I always joke, and it's not a joke, that sort of transformation we're seeing on, let's say, social media. That's sometimes why marketing coaching feels awkward, because I'm like, it's this messy process and it's tedious at times, but yeah.
Yeah. Back on the trust, I like how you're talking about developing an internal place where you can have that trust and that internal sense, not at the absence of an external feedback. I always look at internal conversations, relationships as getting more data. It's not getting an answer, it's just getting more data. And then, yeah, having your own way of processing that into your truth and your trust in what's happening.
I don't know if you experience this. I'm not working so much on the level of organizations or even with like executives, but so often in my work, there can be almost a resistance I see, but even sometimes a fear of being quiet enough to go inside and like really connect to what's there. And I think that is, if I could wave a magic wand and have for all of my clients, I would wish that for everyone on the planet, that they have this sense of connection to their core self. And I think that is a prerequisite for developing self-trust, is that there is a relationship with this part of us.
No, I think it's there. I see it a lot. One of the questions I ask leaders quite often is, what do you want? And it sounds like a very simple question. And it's that inner sense of what your truth is. And the reason being is I lost my sense of that probably 5 or 10 years before I left corporate. It allowed me not to have the trust and not to allow it to emerge and have control. And there's a lot of stress and frustration, and it just wasn't good. When we met in the coaching program is where it probably really kicked into high gear of developing my internal sense and being okay with what's coming, what's emerging.
Yeah, and that's such a completely different way of operating and of seeing ourselves world. Like I said earlier, we so deeply want certainty, we'll do anything to feel that way, when really what is more helpful is in that moment where I feel like I need to move faster and I need to understand and I need to figure out, I need to grasp for answers. That's actually the point where let me go outside, let me go for a walk, let me slow way down and reconnect to what's here. Because then that's the place where you have the option to observe, to have agency over a response. You're not just in that default knee-jerk autopilot mode. And there's just more and different information there. And if I think about pulling back the blinders and having a more advanced view of what's available at any given moment, it can feel, I'll speak for myself. Sometimes in those moments, it's like the urgency is so strong, it feels totally counterintuitive to slow down, but that's actually the most important or the most helpful thing. But like training ourselves out of what feels like autopilot.
Yeah. I see it a lot when a change happens to a leader or to an organization that they want to just jump to the new normal and avoid this whole chaos. And to me, they're skipping the creativity pieces of it. What can be emergent? What can they evolve? Or what have they been doing that may not continue to serve them moving forward? And yeah, it's like creating that space and those conditions for that to come out. I'm curious, what do you see as conditions needed to allow emergence to come out of chaos?
First and foremost, it is understanding that, as I said at the beginning, chaos, these periods of where we plunge into the abyss of chaos, as Margaret Wheatley says, a feature, not a bug. That if we look at nature, we think about the way that nature is always expanding, adapting, evolving, and iterating on itself. And what happens when that doesn't happen to an organism or something in nature? It goes extinct. And so I think first and foremost, it's understanding that these periods of chaos are an indication something new is about to arrive. That's development if we're talking about human. And I think that's the first most important thing, is making friends with it, and then giving yourself the space to see is starting to organize. Because the interesting thing is that chaos is not the opposite of order. They're in an intimate relationship with each other. One always leads to the other. When a system plunges into a period of chaos that precipitates adaptation, if you can map it through computers, this chaotic process, what emerges is a shape, it's a pattern. Pattern emerges, and it's not created by the computer, it's in them. And over time, order reveals itself, and this is known as the strange attractor. There's so much like weird language in quantum mechanics. So it's this strange attractor where, and you can Google these, there's some really cool images of these strange shapes that reveal themselves. And as humans, this strange attractor is the shape of what's new and how we can start to create meaning from what's happening. Right. So often when we plunge into these periods of chaos, it's often likened to a dark night of the soul that I'm guessing most of us listening have experienced before. And what happens after those moments, we can create meaning from what we've experienced, and it can actually become part of our own personal mythology. So I think that these are the types of things to have in mind. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks. I like that. Oh, simply making the space, and a space that's good for them to figure out what might emerge, and having a sense. And I love the visuals, so we can share some links to those.
Like when there's a period of instability, what do people do? Whether it's an individual or a family or an organization or a leader, we really start to try to clamp down on making things the way that it was before. And what happens when we do that is our vision gets really narrow. We can lose sight of what else is out there. We can get really lost in the mind. Again, that's like the signal. Oh, I actually need to let go of the control and observe. Maybe not perpetually, right? But
yeah, opening up and making sure it reflects what matters to you. And yeah, I've been talking to a lot of people who have been impacted by layoffs recently, and they all are some of them are very narrow. And it's just simply to say, okay, wow, what matters to you right now? And just allow them to step back, and also give them permission to do nothing, which is a way of maybe creating some space for people. I guess the other is, if systems always are going between the order and chaos, and as a leader, is there anything that they can do to help manage through this? Or is it just up to the system to control or not? In other words, what is the need of a leader through chaos in your mind?
yeah, I do think that it comes back to what I was saying a moment or two ago about the trust, flexibility, and support. I think both as an individual leader, a person can resource themselves in those three realms, but also extending that out to a team as well. I do think it requires the sort of skills, metacognition, self-reflection, these things, what I said earlier about core values, the self, being, holding that kind of steady center, and understanding that sometimes I talk about, just because we're maybe partnering with chaos and we're trying to befriend chaos and we're cozying up to it, that doesn't mean that I like it, or that it feels good while it's happening, or that I'm just relaxing and being on a ride with chaos. It's really hard. But if we can, so I think what's important is, okay, given this, what are some things that I can do to shepherd myself, shepherd my team through this period of time where we are plunged into a bit of an abyss? For me, I think about that as attending to my well-being. When I'm in a period of chaos personally, like my number one focus, I always say, is skin, muscles, bone. Like, how am I attending to my creature body? Because if I lose myself in trying to figure out what's happening and land on an answer and get to the other side, it is only adding more suffering. Being inside of a chaotic period is hard enough. So I think holding that as not glossing over the pain or fear of the moment, but holding a line of, like, how do we keep things going, but attached to our well-being.
Yeah, kind of shepherd that. And also, you mentioned Margaret Wheatley, and for those, Dani put me onto a book called Leadership and the New Science. And from that, one of the things I liked is about managing or leading with the energy instead of control. And it's creating a sense and a vision so that the team knows where they're headed, or even better, they're pulled towards there. I think she uses the metaphor of a compass, I think a magnetic. I believe so. Anyway, so like it's being pulled like by a magnetic force or gravity or something like that, where the team knows and you manage energetically, which I thought was an interesting way of looking at leadership from a chaos perspective.
Gosh, yeah. And I didn't even really remember that part of the book. But what I'm appreciating it about it, like anew in this moment, is that there's something about that includes more of a person than just the thinking mind. Gosh, anything I can do to support myself, my clients, the world in reducing cognitive dominance and starting to bring some of these additional intelligences that we have, not to supersede the intellect, but perhaps to be a little bit more balanced with it. And that just hit me when you were saying that about like the energetics of that draw forward. If you're not plugged into something beyond the mind, you're probably not going to pick up on.
It's like the question that's often asked is why? Like, what is the purpose? What's the meaning behind what they're doing and how you're doing it? And that's not necessarily important if you're managing from a control perspective. But if you're leading from more of an energetic perspective, it's okay, where are we moving towards? And I think when you have that, it allows for that emergence of new possibilities.
Yeah. I mean, at a super basic level, you could describe chaos theory as the science of surprises. And I think that like what you're saying right now supports that, where it's for holding this different type of way of being, we allow for flexibility, surprise, spontaneity, illumination, all these extraordinary things we get to experience as human beings, that when we're holding that more rigid mechanistic view or that view of control, we just don't have access to.
Or actively suppress it. Sometimes a surprise is a quote mistake, or it's a deviation from the plan, or something like that, that a leader would just go, no, either maybe not even be aware of it or attuned to it, but even if you do, they just crush it down instead of letting that new wonderful thing emerge.
Yes.
The other concept I liked from Whitley's book was the power lies in relationships, the leadership power, and not in the roles. Obviously, when I'm saying leadership as a mindset, it's not a role. It's playing into this, which is how managing every individual relationship is very important from a leadership perspective and from a chaos perspective, because that's how things emerge, I guess is the right way.
In nature, where there's different organisms that are dependent on each other for the survival, like symbiotic relationships. I live up here in Northern California. I think about these redwood trees and these redwood forests and sort of webs of roots and the mycelium and all these things that are happening that we can't see as humans, and how that's what maintains an ecosystem and allows it to iterate and become stronger and grow and adapt, and because of the relationship.
Dani, let's return to your three main points and the flexibility. So what does chaos theory say about flexibility and how leaders can shift their mindset a little bit?
The way that I see this is flexibility. We've been talking about adaptation, innovation, creativity, being open to observing those things, which I think are all ways of being flexible. But it's also, if we're talking about the science, which I am not a scientist, but right, where perhaps like up to now, most organizations have been modeled off a more mechanistic worldview, right? Like reducing things down to their first, this sort of expecting a kind of linear trajectory, and anything outside of that means there's something wrong, right? Flexibility invites us into a more dynamic and frankly, a more realistic way of operating, because this is how nature operates. It's flexible. But when I think about it on a very sort of practical level, it being flexible is one of the principles that I've put together is establishing multiple life roles or ways of being in the world, examining the things that you believe to be true about yourself, about the world, and allowing yourself to hold some of those things a little more loosely. And, specifically, if you hear yourself, anytime I hear someone say, this is just how I am, or I've always been this way, right? There's an opportunity there to get curious and see, like, what would it look like for me to hold a little more of an open hand, like letting things move through a little bit more fluidly, thinking about how we might soften our attachments to who we are or what's possible, asking ourselves things like, are these things true? Are they helpful? Is it limiting what's possible for me or my team or the company or the world or my family? So when I think about flexibility, there's like a loosening in there.
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. When you were talking, the curiosity came up, so I'm glad you brought that because it's being curious and being curious to maybe other people's perspective back on you. Just as again that the point I raised earlier about the date, like it's just data and being curious, like, oh, they're saying something to me, and it's why is that, and what's that curiosity? And I like the holding it lightly piece.
Yeah. Geez, I'm in my early 40s now, and I still can't believe some of the kind of blind spots that fall away and the things that I'm learning about myself and how certain beliefs that I didn't even know I had so rigidly are all of a sudden kind of up for examination. And it's, whoa, I can actually have more of a say in this. I think it can be a very helpful self inquiry, self examination to start to ask oneself those types of questions like, why do I believe that? Is that even helpful to me? What's the difference?
Yeah.
The way of reframing this? Might I try that on as an experiment?
Yeah. And even extending that to leading a team, just being curious about how the team operates or how something is typically done or what playbook is usually used and just all those type of versions of that once in addition to the self. Sounds like maybe an interesting way to help leaders explore chaos more.
I love that. And actually, I've been playing around lately in my orbit around like this idea of creating your own playbook or like your own understanding, like what your specific curriculum is during your time on the planet. And there's certainly themes that apply to probably everyone, but at the same time, within those different categories, everyone's unique. Everyone has their own unique flavor of stuff or things that have happened to them or that they've been through or the things that hook them in particular. And I think if we can start to see, oh, like my playbook includes this, includes that, this is an area where I really need to focus versus that person over there has a lot of ease and fluidity with it. Yeah.
Yeah, I like the playbook. And I'm probably on my 1000th playbook. It's like these continue to evolve, right? And what made me think about that is like the relationship piece, like a beginning part of a relationship is a very different playbook than once it's established or once something massively shifts in that relationship. What you did when the beginning part of a relationship is very different than what you do after 10 years or even after 20 years.
And this, so net right, it allows you the flexibility to grow and evolve and change and to be a different person and to change your mind. If we're thinking about identity, or what we value shapes our identity. This is something again like that can be held loosely. Like I think about what I valued at 15 versus 25 versus even 6 months ago compared to now. It gives us permission to change and adapt and grow and to give ourselves some grace along the way.
Yeah. I guess anything more about flexibility?
The only other thing about flexibility is another one of the principles is developing new skills. So this is another way that we can stay flexible and stay in that place of adapting and growing is, I'll speak for myself. If there's something that I want to try that I know I'm not going to just like immediately be really good at, I often avoid it or resist it. But if I can push myself out of my comfort zone and put myself in environments where I'm a beginner and I'm failing and bad at things, there's so much value there because you learn so much about who you are and how you respond to that. But then it also opens up the opportunity to learn and grow and develop.
Yeah, I like that beginner's mindset. That can be, it is very humbling
Mm.
in almost all cases. So it's good. And it's back to that curiosity as well. Brings that. I like that. Adding skills and beginner mindset as a piece of flexibility.
Yeah.
So, Dani, we've talked about trust and flexibility and support. Do you mind just giving us a little summary of what your perspective on those three are?
Sure. Trust, flexibility, and support are practical ways that a person can begin practicing moving with life rather than manipulating, controlling, or even resisting life. They are skills for building resilience and partnering with life rather than pushing against it. That's another Adrienne Maree Brown thing. So trust is developing the sort of inner fortitude to be with uncertainty and not get bowled over by it, by its implications. So that's all those sort of inner skills. Flexibility is, we just discussed that. It being open and flexible, and not just being open, flexible, but proactively questioning the ingrained beliefs we have about the world or what we know or believe to be true. And then support is understanding that we are interconnected and to actually do what we can to really mindfully, intentionally strengthen the web of connection that we're inside and to really foster relationships, strong relationships.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, chaos is a feature, not a bug.
Cool.
I love it.
Yeah.
All right. So, a couple of closing questions for you. So, what is one leadership lesson that you keep learning again and again?
Gosh, I didn't know how I was going to answer this, but I would say again and again, what I learn is that the second that I catch myself in black and white thinking in any sort of extreme, that is an immediate signal for me to take a step back and check in with myself. Because what I have learned and what I continue to learn over and over again is that the second that I am attached to either end of an extreme, that I'm actually not in reality, that I'm missing out on what's actually here, because reality is such an extraordinary spectrum of that gray area. So this is something that I continue to learn over and over.
Yeah, I love that. I love turning towards that gray area or making sure you remain in the gray area. Yeah.
This is what can have us, like I was saying earlier, shepherd ourselves through the gray area. Yeah.
Nice. What one word describes your leadership right now?
So curious.
Well, thank you, Dani, for coming on. I like being on the mission to bring chaos to people in a positive mindset and to help them embrace it and emerge with the creativity and the curiosity that can come from there.
Yes. So maybe just one more thing I can say is that it's not, oh, I'm going to embrace chaos and just don't even worry about the fact that things are really hard right now. Embracing chaos is what gives us the ability to hold paradox. That a lot is changing very fast, a lot is perhaps dying or dissolving, but that means the opposite is also true. And I think if we can hold both of those truths, those realities, that's the way through.
Yeah, I love it. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you for having me.
Dani, if people want to continue following you and seeing what you're up to, what's the best way for them to connect with you?
Yeah, thank you. My company is Self-Made. So if you want to visit my website, it's joinselfmade.co. I also have been writing on Substack since 2020. So you can find me there at selfmade.substack.com. And you can always send me an email, Dani@joinselfmade.co. I'm always energized to have conversations about this. You can reach out to me directly.
Great. Thank you. Thanks for listening to Roar Mindset, Leading Through Chaos. Disruption isn't going away, but you can embrace it and turn it into an advantage. Until next time, stop fighting disruption, lead with clarity, and thrive in uncertain times.